So to begin, I'm going to give some background information about the Russian Revolution, and then at the end I'm going to give the communist perspective on all of it. So it really began when the people began to lose faith in Tsar Nicholas II, the current Romanov leader of the time. The government was corrupt, the Russian economy was backwards, and there was cruel treatments of the peasants, there were poor working conditions, food shortages, military losses like the Russia-Japanese War, which were extremely embarrassing, and on top of that, democratic ideas had begun to take root. Tsar Nicholas II, against his own will, tried to reconcile with the people, like in 1905 with the October Manifesto, which was the first constitution, and it established the State Duma, which is kind of like the U.S. Congress. However, he thought he had divine right, and he always attempted to undermine the Duma's power, and he repeatedly dissolved it. All of this led to the February Revolution, which was the first phase of the Russian Revolution, and it led to Russia's involvement in World War I. World War I, Russia involvement, they were no match for German industrialism. And even though they attempted to galvanize the people against a common enemy, there were great casualties, greater than those sustained by any nation in any other previous wars, and it completely wrecked their economy. On the February Revolution, the demonstrators were huge crowds of striking industrial workers who all refused to leave. They destroyed police stations, several factories, and elected deputies to the Petrograd Soviet, which kind of became like the modern Duma, or the Soviet Duma. Regiments of the Petrograd army opened fire, they killed demonstrators, and even though through all of that, protesters kept to the streets, and the troops wavered, and some of them even defected to the protesters. After this, the imperial government resigned, and the Duma formed a provisional government. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne in favor of his brother Michael, whose refusal ended the Tsarist autocracy and the Romanov rule. Now, after this, in the summer of 1907, someone named Lenin attempted to make another revolution against the provisional government, and Lenin is largely considered the leader of this revolution. It didn't really work, and the provisional government thwarted them, the Bolsheviks, that is, the party that Lenin was a part of, and they were all accused of aligning themselves with the Germans and were arrested or fled. However, afterwards, the anti-Bolsheviks suffered, and they even had to ask the Bolsheviks for help. And so because of that, in the autumn, the Bolsheviks had begun to extend to power. All of this eventually led to the October Revolution, or the Bolshevik Revolution. Because of the weak provisional government, Vladimir Lenin led a nearly bloodless coup d'etat. And he established a new government with himself as the leader, and he became a virtual dictator, and this was the first Marxist state. He made peace with the German government, and he nationalized industry and distributed land. In 1918, there was civil war against anti-Bolshevik White Army forces and the Bolshevik Red Army forces. In 1920, the Bolsheviks won, and in 1922, the USSR was established. And in 1923, Lenin died and Stalin took over the Communist Party. Now, some important things to keep in mind for the communist perspective in all of this is that they're kind of winning, you know? The Bolsheviks, which is considered to be the Communist Party, won the Civil War. They won even after the summer of 1917, where it wasn't looking too hot. And they eventually took power and created the USSR. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Communist Party, even though it's not really looked upon today as it being like the best thing, but back then they thought that the capitalist system was evil and that they were protecting the people. So the communist point of view here is that they are protecting egalitarianism. You know, they're protecting the people and they're fighting for equal rights. Not so much as the oppression that we see it today. And so all of this is seen as something that is inherently good. All of these victories and the creation of the USSR, the first Marxist state, is seen as a victory for the people. It's seen as a victory for the proletariat. And finally, another thing to keep in mind is that the Russians had been undergoing years of oppressive Tsarist rule. So the ascension of the Communist Party to power can also represent the end of this and the introduction to what we view as, like the safe hold of democracy, but to them, the equivalent of that was communism, which was going to make everyone equal and was going to end oppression. And so that was the viewpoint of communism, that it was going to help the people and that it was going to be the best thing for the country.